Okay, so Amplify. So this is based off the talk I did here a couple of months ago, where I made reference to the AWS Amplify toolchain and the CLI, and sweet. There were a number of questions that were raised around, what is Amplify, what does it do, what's that whole deploy process you've got running, and all of those sorts of things. So today, I'm back to do a little bit of a dive into AWS Amplify. It's not quite as in-depth as I was originally hoping, because when I did a run through the other day, I realised at about the 75-minute mark that it was a tad too long. So this may turn into a multi-parter, depending on whether or not people are interested. But AWS Amplify, or how I fake being a developer. So, who am I? That's supposed to have a photo of me, so just pretend the right-hand side has me. So, I'm an AWS consultant for cloud solutions, or Telstra, depending on which way you want to look at the world. I've been playing on AWS, I say since 2012, but I can remember when EC2 instances used to take 45 minutes to spin up, and Linux was your only option, and I think the joke there is, I've been playing with AWS since it was S1. Anyway. I spend most of my time playing in serverless land. I thought containers were going to be a passing fad. Might have been wrong on that. But anyway, just moved straight into serverless and haven't looked back. After my last presentation, it was suggested to me that I get on this thing called Twitter. Now, anybody who's tried to get on Twitter in 2019, you'll notice that ain't a lot of usernames available. Merriel was taken, Matt Merriel was taken, Matthew Merriel was taken, so I've gone with my Xbox gamer tag, and we'll just call that done. Not a lot on there at the moment. All you'll see is me ranting about how bad GCP support is, and how it took them 2 months to get my account working. But anyway, so what are we going to cover today? Today we're going to do a little bit of a walkthrough on what AWS Amplify actually is, what it does, how we can use it as a part of our daily workflow, and we'll go through the process of hopefully building and deploying an application using AWS Amplify and GraphQL and a few other little bits and pieces. So, AWS Amplify, URL's there if anybody can take a photo of it quick enough before it disappears. It's already gone. Okay, so at a high level, the Amplify framework is a CLI and a bunch of tools that helps developers, or like me, cloud engineers or cloud consultants who want to fake being a developer, deploy applications using serverless backends. So, and all the typical stuff here, it's an easy to use library, it's a powerful tool chain, rah, 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 rah. Where it starts getting a little interesting is when you start having a look at all the tools that it will actually allow you to deploy pretty much out of the box. So we've got things like analytics here, running one simple command and we can hook in AWS Pinpoint into our application, start getting user statistics. We can start hooking in our own custom calls and really start getting some analytics about how we're using our website. Not something you can't do on your own, but the ability to do it in one simple command makes life a hell of a lot easier. Same thing with API. Again, API is not particularly hard. API gateway and a Lambda will get you 95% of the way there. But this will also not only allow you to do standard REST APIs, but also GraphQL, which the more I play with, I'm actually becoming quite a big fan of GraphQL recently. We're talking things like storage, we're talking things like notifications, pub subs, interactions, we can hook in Lambda functions, we can do our S3 storage, all by just simply doing individual little commands, which if I've memorized this web page correctly, is as simple as doing like an Amplify status or an Amplify add API. And if the demo works later on, we'll actually go through the process of adding an API, a GraphQL, Cognito, and all of these things which, let's face it, Cognito's never been the world's simplest thing to deploy. I like the idea of not having to maintain my own, user repository, and it's cheap. 50,000 users a month for nothing is kind of nice, but painful. So that's a little bit of a quick little thing here. I highly advise people go to this website, have a look at it if you haven't already. If you look at the documentation, so if we just have a quick squeeze at, for example, our JavaScript here, it's got step-by-step guides for getting started. This is some of the best documentation I've seen on an AWS product, by far. Now, I know the bar's not, like, brilliant to begin with, but, So it goes through how to manually configure up, it goes through base sample code. If you want to dive into specific features, for example, we can come in here and say what's involved in deploying an API. And just to have a look on the right-hand side there, there are all the steps talking about things like transformation of your GraphQL statements, how to use the CLI, how to do it automatically, how to do it manually, how to hook in your own back-end services. It's all there. It's all really well documented. I am not a developer, yet I've been able to make stuff work, so, the bar's not particularly, highly set. Fantastic. So, I talk about this demo. What is this demo? So, again, if all goes well, we're going to deploy a simple note-taking application, because I was going to do a to-do app, but everybody does a to-do app. So we're going to do notes, because it's less fields. When we think about deploying this application, we want to configure a baseline project. So we're going to need the basic services, like we're going to need authentication, we're going to need an API, we're going to need to make sure that individual users, when they log in, can't see other users' data and all of these sorts of things. We're going to want it all serverless, and we're going to want a deployment pipeline to go with it. So we'll start by setting up the baseline project. We'll move on to configuring our deployment pipeline. We'll then look at setting up a development pipeline so that we've got a place to test and deploy new features. If there's enough time, we'll look at adding additional functionality like analytics to the platform. And at some point in time running through all of this, I'm sure that we're going to run out of time, because I realised earlier on this evening, I've never actually done this on a mobile phone, so I have absolutely no idea how long all this stuff's going to take to deploy. But hey, I talk a little bit about the deployment pipeline here, and the high level that we're going with is we've got our development team, and it's the age-old story here. We've got our master. If we think about our code repo, we've got our master branch, which is going to be our production application, and we've got a dev branch of some specific, you can have dev, staging, don't particularly care. So that's kind of where we want to end up. We want a repeatable process that we can deploy in dev, staging, camera fall over. And then we want something that we can use for our master deployment as well. So, let's see if this is going to work. That shouldn't be on the screen, but that's okay. We'll roll with that. So, this is where things already go off the rails a little bit, but that's okay. So, step one is to build our baseline environment. And the first thing we've got to do here is we've got to install the Amplify package. So we can just do a npm install. We'll do it global because, it's always a useful thing, and it's doing something. That's not necessary, a failure out of the... Right, so that answers that question. How fast does it run on a mobile phone? Doesn't. Hey, fatal error. In that case, what we're going to do is we're going to move over to one I prepared earlier, I think. Okay, so if I have a look, Windows, Linux, bad. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll actually just have a little bit of a look over here. What I have here is one that I prepared earlier. What we've done here is we've started off by installing the AWS Amplify CLI, which is just a standard npm install AWS-amplify/CLI. Nice, simple, works most of the time. And that'll give us all of the baseline tools that we want and need in order to be able to deploy our environment. So if I have a look here, then what we should be able to do is actually, if I create a new project, now, for my demo, I'm using React, but we'll skip over that bit for the moment. So all I'm doing at the moment, just to make life easy, is just creating myself a blank React application. And that's actually not going super fast either. But what we're doing is we're starting off with just a blank, generic React application. And then once we've done that, we will go ahead, jump into it and start adding in our individual Amplify components. Moral of the story for people who are presenting at meetups, don't do your tests at home when you're on, high-speed fibre. It gives you a false sense of how long things take. Yeah, I wasn't going to do that, but I'm presenting at Summit next week and was told that I need to be hopeful and do a live demo then. So I'm like, well, if I can do a live demo at Summit, how bad can a live demo at a meetup be? The answer is not awesome.
So the Wi-Fi is good at Summit?
No, I've actually confirmed that for my demo, they're actually going to give me a cabled connection. As I said, I know what happens when AWS give you Wi-Fi. It doesn't work. It works about as well as when we give you Wi-Fi at Vantage. Ooh, we're live streaming, aren't we? Ooh, my employer's not going to be happy with that. Well. All right, so now that we've got our baseline application, we can simply just do an amplify init, which will set up our baseline configuration for our Amplify application. And what this is going to do is, right, it wants to know, because it's going to go and configure an Amplify application in our AWS environment, it wants to know what we want to name it. So we're just going to call it Meetup Demo because, super exciting name. We're going to call, it wants a name for the environment that it's going to deploy because we can deploy multiple environments. Each environment needs its own name so that we can check them out when we're doing our deployments. We'll just call it master. That'll line up with the master branch in our Git repo. We're just going to use Visual Studio Code. We're going to configure it in JavaScript. We want React. Configure our source directory, build directories, standard npm commands. Do we want to use an AWS profile to deploy this? Yes, please. We're going to use Meetup. And now it's actually going to go ahead and create that in the AWS environment. Now, that can get a little bit more complicated if you don't already have a profile configured on your local machine. You're going to need to give it an access key and a secret key. But it'll actually jump you into the AWS environment and let you log in and it'll configure the rest for you. So, not that you should be using access keys. I don't want to encourage that. So what we can see here is it's actually going through, it's creating our authenticated and our unauthenticated IAM roles. It's going through and configuring our deployment buckets for our website. It's doing it all via CloudFormation template. And we don't need to know how any of that works. Isn't that fantastic when you can give people who have no idea about AWS the ability to deploy production applications? Because that never goes wrong. But at least they're doing it in CloudFormation, so you can go back and have a look at what they did. So there's always that working for you. Okay, so we now have an Amplify environment. In fact, if I jump across into this guy, then we should be able to have a look at our Amplify website. And actually we won't see anything because we haven't deployed it yet. Silly me. Okay. So what we'll do now is we'll just go ahead and will this work? Amplify, AWS Amplify, React, and we'll give ourselves some Bootstrap because I'm lazy. Bum, 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 bum. And is this actually going to work or is this going to fail too? Because this could fail too. No, this actually looks like it's going to work. Okay, so it's just AWS Amplify that isn't working. You know, the one thing I'm actually trying to demo. But never mind. Okay, so that's just going to go ahead and download the AWS Amplify, the AWS Amplify React, and the Bootstrap. All these do is allow us to make Amplify-based calls out of our application. So it just gives us a nice, easy library where we can go through, and it just makes things like integrating our GraphQL, our Cognito calls, our authenticated user calls, and all of those things a little bit easier. So now that that's done, we can go ahead and say, okay, we have a baseline application. It doesn't actually do anything yet. It's just an empty React website. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add some authentication. So we can go amplify, add, auth. That's pretty simple. Okay, there we go. Do you want the default configuration? Do you want the default configuration with federation? Or do you want to do it all manually? I am lazy, so we will go default configuration. Do you want your user to be able to sign up? Yeah, we'll give them a username. And yeah, we want their email, that's fine. Okay, so that's now configured. Our project is now configured to use Cognito. See how easy that was? It's so much easier than doing it by hand. It's not deployed anywhere yet. We don't actually have a Cognito user pool. We don't actually have anything yet. We're going to need to deploy that into our AWS environment. But before we do that, we are also going to want to add some kind of data source to our application. So let's go ahead and add an API. Add API. And there we go. So we want GraphQL, we've got to give it a name, Meetup demo. Do we want to use API keys or do we want to use Cognito user pools? We want to use Cognito user pools. Do we want to have an annotated GraphQL schema? Nah. Do we want to be guided? Yes, because I'm lazy. Do we want a single object, a one-to-many, so a one-to-one, a one-to-many, or a many-to-many? We'll go objects with fine-grained access control. Yeah, we'll do that. Do you want to edit the schema now? Sure, why not? Okay, so you can't actually find my Visual Studio Code install, but that's okay. I was half expecting that. So if I cut across into my VS Code, hey, there we go. It's actually kind of half working. We can go ahead and open up our Amplify. Can you guys, kind of a little small, isn't it? But basically we're going into our Amplify, we'll go into our back end, our API, our Meetup demo, and we should have a schema.graphsql. So this is the default schema, which I should be able to make bigger. Whoa, too big. All right, so it's just put in some generic boilerplate there. It's giving us, managers, employees, a couple of objects. We'll just go ahead and replace that with a very exciting single note. Yeah. Now, who here doesn't know GraphQL? Okay, fair few people. Basically, all we're saying here is we're going to have an object type of note. We only want people who are the owner of the note to be able to query the note. It's going to have a randomly generated, it's going to have an ID, and it's going to have a string. Not a particularly interesting type, but, it's a demo. So we'll go ahead and save that, and then we'll cut across back to our code, and we'll say enter. We have completed defining our schema, and then it's going to turn around and say, yep, sweet, cool, not a problem, all done. So we've gone ahead in our project and we've defined authentication and an API. So we now have somewhere to store the data and we're protecting the data. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do an Amplify push, which is going to take that configuration that we've got on our local code and actually deploy it into an AWS environment. So if we do that, then you should see a bunch of CloudFormation. Yeah, there we go. So it's looked at what we've got locally in our project. It's looked at our Amplify environment and our AWS environment and gone, I can't find auth, I can't find API, so I'm going to have to create them both. Is that cool? Yes, that's cool. And it's now going to go ahead and do that. Do you want to generate code for your newly created GraphQL API? Yes, please, because I don't want to have to write it. I want it in JavaScript. Yeah, sure, put it in the GraphQL folder. Do you want to generate, update all possible GraphQL operations, queries, mutations, and subscriptions? So basically, do you want me to write all of your CRUD and CRUDL stuff for you? Yes, because I don't want to have to do it. The idea around GraphQL, for those who aren't aware, is the fact that if I have something like a user on a website, and that user can publish blogs, and blogs can have comments. So I can say, I want to look at Matthew, and then I want a list of every blog that Matthew's written, and I want a list of every comment that's been put against every blog that Matthew's written. And I can do that in one query. Now it's asking how many levels deep do we want to go. We'll go with 2 for the moment, that's fine. And it's now going to go ahead and deploy that into our AWS environment. That actually will take a couple of minutes. So while we do that, we'll keep that down the bottom there so that we can watch it do its little thing. And we'll dive a little bit closer into the actual code because there's all these folders here that I haven't shown you and you're probably all scratching your head going, what the hell's going on? Yes?
Now, if I recall correctly, you started out with creating a master branch environment and all that.
Haven't actually committed, but I've deployed an environment called master, yes. But I haven't actually committed my code anywhere yet.
The dev, so then your master's your prod?
Yes. I debated about that ad nauseum when I was writing this. Do I start with a dev branch or do I start with a master branch? I decided to go with master because whenever I create a new Git repo by default, it's got a master branch, so that's always the first place I start. But yes, you're right, the code should go along that flow. Okay, so if we have a look at the environment here, we can see that we've got this little Amplify folder in our project now. If we shrink the back end bit, we can see that it's got, and I'm going to summarize a bunch of this because out of the 23 bits I've got left, I've got time for about 2 of them. We've got 4 main components here. We've got config, current cloud backend, and team provider. The config is actually kind of interesting. What Amplify does for you as a part of the configuration and deployment of its tasks is it will actually keep track of each environment that we've got. So at the moment, we've only got one environment. We've got master, and it's currently configured there at the project level, and it's using the Meetup profile that I configured earlier. Not particularly exciting. If we have a look at our local environment info, it's telling it where it can get the profile details from and what the default text editor is and all these sorts of things. If we have a look at project config, we get all the information we described earlier around build commands and all of that sort of stuff. So that's kind of just the baseline configuration bit. Now, where you can get a little bit stuck is when you're starting to work with multiple developers and things start getting a little out of alignment and things can go a little pear-shaped. So keep that in mind. But where things really start to get interesting is this team provider. This team provider, and for those of you who are wondering about this, this account's getting trashed about 5 minutes after I get off stage. So, yeah. The people on the live stream have a better chance, but what it's actually done is it's gone, and as it creates all of our different components in our solution, it actually goes and keeps tracks of all the ARNs and all the names and the regions and all of those sorts of things for us. And that's how it's aligning its deployments and its CloudFormation templates back to our environment. So anytime when you're going through and it's like, oh, I need to be able to reference insert tool here, I need to be able to reference the Cognito because I'm trying to do something that Amplify may or may not support, or Amplify's like every AWS product and always lags a little bit further behind where we want it to be. We can simply go and reference these to pull out the relevant information. At the moment, you can see that some of it's not populated because, well, it's still doing its little buzzy thing down there on the bottom. But as for the individual configurations, they're stored in this back-end folder. And at the moment, you can see that we've got two. We've got auth and we've got API. And this is where all of our schema and our code and all of that is being generated and stored as we've run each of those Amplify commands. So, for example, if we have a look at, is it stack? Should be build, I think. So we can actually go through and see the actual CloudFormation template that it's gone and generated in order to deploy our GraphQL. And we can do the same for our Cognito. So if we do ever get curious around how this thing's working, or we do ever have a desire for some unbeknownst reason to people that we want to go and deploy our own Cognito user pools, you now actually have the CloudFormation template you can start with, which is kind of nice. Because I officially have 1 minute left, what we will do is I'm just going to grab a bunch of source code and whack that into my web page. Bum, bum, bum. If I just go ahead and copy that and whack that into my source app.js for those who actually speak React, and paste that in there. All right, so all I've done is, and if I cut across to that guy to get rid of him, I've just whacked in some text boxes so that we can handle our notes and inputs and all that sort of stuff, and then I've just wrapped the whole thing in with Authenticator, which is just saying to Amplify that I'm protecting my application using the Cognito user pool that I've already provided. So if we cut back across to our, that one, no, that was the wrong one because that shouldn't be there, but never mind. And we actually do npm start at this point, and then starting development server. Starting development server. I really need a faster laptop. really faster laptop. Okay, this is just silly. Come on. You're starting a website with like 100 lines of code. It's really not that hard. Hey, there we go. So, we cut across to, voila, there's our website. Sign into your account. Yay! So we can actually go ahead here and we can create an account and we'll just call it appdev01. And I'll give it a password, appdev01@merriel.com, because what an original email address, and 0400, yeah. That's a good mobile phone number. No, I was not going to type my own mobile phone number in front of you all. I'm not quite that silly. Right, so it's just sent a confirmation code to my email address, in theory. Hey, look at that. Confirmation code is 483148. Hey, and app dev01. And the password. Incorrect username or password. Don't tell me I typed. Oh, don't you hate it when you do that? appdev02. Master mistyped the password the first time around. So, appdev. I told you back at the beginning of the meetup, this was either going to work really well or really not. And let me just retype that, just to make sure that I've done it properly this time. And you're going to send me another email. Okay, that's a different code, so that must be it. 659. Hey, we have our application. So we're signed in as appdev02, and if we actually scroll down here, we can type in our notes, test 1, test 2, test 3, and there are our lovely notes. And if we have a quick squiz in our DynamoDB table, which is where we're storing all of our data, we can see our table that we created, which is our note table. It's gone and created a DynamoDB table for each type that we've defined in our GraphQL endpoint. And if we have a look at the notes, we can see they've each got their ID, they've got their created at, their owner, which, as I mentioned before, when we defined the note, we said we wanted to only allow the owner of the note to be able to see it. So Amplify's automatically turned around and gone, well, in order for me to know who the owner is, I'm actually going to need a field to report that. So it's gone ahead and added that for us, and we can see test 1, test 2, test 3. So all we would really have to do at this point is add Amplify add hosting, which will add a production S3 bucket, a CloudFront endpoint, and an SSL certificate. And we have a fully fledged working multi-user notes application. Even with the stuff ups and the NPM issues, it's literally taken 35 minutes. So obviously there's a lot that I didn't cover. More than happy to come back in a future session and do a little bit more of a deep dive. Where I'm actually going to be taking this personally is a lot of those issues that AWS consultants or engineers face. You know, you want to put together a very quick website to help your users shut down their dev environments. You know, all dev environments, start up at 7, shut down at 6. You might want to give them a quick little website where they can go in and hit the red button to say, no, I'm working after hours, I need my environment. Or you might just want a simple page that pulls up the budgets or the spend for each of your AWS environments. These are nice, simple, easy way to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and put some of those together, and happy to put them up on GitHub or share them with the group later on. So we're pretty much over time. Happy to take questions from people. Yeah? No? Microphone.
Hang on. Yes. Going back to the build phase, Amplify add API, you had to answer a lot of questions.
Yes.
It builds a configuration file. Can you pass that configuration file into that command, say, during a pipeline build, for instance, so you don't have to pre-answer all those questions. You've already got it.
Yes, so now
Okay.
that they're actually defined, if we have a quick look in the, where are we? There's my VS Code. So if we actually have a look in, for example, our CloudFormation, not our nested stack, we want our Cognito CloudFormation. You can actually say, okay, Cognito may not be a super great one. As an example, do I have the, here we go. Yeah, okay. So you can see in the GraphQL CloudFormation template that it's actually got a whole bunch of parameters. So you can actually go and feed them in yourself. And the other thing you can do is you can add pre-existing. So for example, if you already had your own GraphQL server that you wanted to interface in, you don't want to have to deploy your own from scratch, you can do that. And as I mentioned before, the instructions on how to do that are right there. Any other questions, queries? I'll be hanging around for a little bit after the session if people have got any questions, queries, concerns, feedback. They just want to laugh at me because it didn't work. Happy to take any or all of the above.
No questions? Cool. Thank you very much.
Easy.